first sentence of the letter says, as a result of the sale at auction of your 2 paintings, you will have received $25 million. And then it goes on from there. What 2 paintings are being referred to there?
I believe at the time that was a Poplars by Monet and great picture still life, and I forget the artist at the moment. It was an impressionist painting.
And prior to this happening, did you have any conversations about the sale of those paintings?
Conversation with
who?
Mrs. Clark.
Yes.
At the hospital, correct?
Yes.
Who else was present when you had conversations with her on that subject?
I don't recall if Hadassah was in the room during any of those conversations or not.
Well, what was discussed concerning the sale of those paintings?
First, which paintings, if any, she wanted to sell, what price she expected to get for them, how we would go about selling them, which auction house, or if she wanted to do a private sale. I mean, it was a series of conversations.
What led, in the first place, to the idea of her selling any paintings? What provoked that?
Her desire to make gifts to Mrs. Pierre and Hadassah.
You had previously told us yesterday that her art, these paintings, were something she highly valued, that she had these, correct?
Yes.
These were paintings by Impressionist masters, right?
Yes.
But she told you she wanted to sell these in order to make gifts.
After discussion of potential other items to sell and the time frame that it might take to sell things such as the Connecticut property.
Did she tell you the dollar amount of the gift that she wanted to make to Hadassah Peri at that time?
At which time?
When she first brought up the idea of selling paintings in order to do that.
I don't
Objection
recall.
to the form. Okay.
We're talking about the 2000. As reflected in the February 3rd letter.
Well, it says, as a result of the sale at auction of your 2 paintings, you will have received $25 million. It's dated February 3, 2000. Do you recall when these paintings were sold? Was it 2000? Was it 1999? When was it?
I don't recall whether it was the fall 99 sale or the spring 2000 sale.
Well, the sentence says you will have received. Okay, fair enough. We'll confirm that. In any event, prior to their sale, you had conversations with her to the effect that she wanted to make gifts to Mrs. Pierre and Hadassah Peri. Correct?
Yes.
In what amount?
Initially, she didn't specify an amount. She said she wanted to make substantial gifts to them.
And when she told you that, what did you say?
I said, you don't have the cash resources available without selling certain of your assets.
Well, how could you have said that unless you knew at least ballpark what she was expecting to give?
I don't remember the time that she specified the amount that she wanted to give, but the first conversation she said she wanted to make substantial gifts. And I said, if it was what range, and she said, I'll let you know. But can I do this, and do I have the cash? I believe she originally indicated that, not originally, when, as one of the earlier conversations, she had wanted to give the paintings to Hadassah and Mrs. Peri. And Mrs. Pierre.
And when she made that suggestion to you, what did you say?
I said that for cash flow purposes, that would be very disastrous or difficult, because we would then need to raise cash to pay the gift taxes on it. And if Mrs. Peri or Mrs. Pierre sold the paintings, they would have a substantial capital gain, because their basis for determining gain or loss would be what your basis is, which I presume to be extremely low.
So based on that information, did she change her mind and say, fine, I won't give the paintings, let's sell them and I'll give them a gift from the proceeds? Is that basically what she said?
Yes.
This letter says, in the third sentence, you have stated your intention to make gifts of the full amounts of $10 million to Mrs. Pierre and $15 million to Mrs. Peri, rather than giving them the net proceeds of the sale of the paintings after deduction of the capital gains taxes. Do you see that sentence?
Yes.
When did you hear from her that she wanted to give $15 million to Mrs. Peri?
Sometime prior to this letter, but I don't know specifically.
Prior to her telling you that, had she used a different amount?
No.
So the amount of the gift that she had, we'll withdraw that. But you were there in person in the hospital room when she said $15 million to Hadassah Peri and $10 million to Mrs. Pierre, correct?
Yes.
Was Hadassah in the room then?
I don't recall she was in the room then, but Hadassah was aware of the amount that Mrs. Clark had indicated she wanted to make a gift to both her and to Mrs. Pierre.
How do you know that?
Because Hadassah had talked to me in one of the times I was at the hospital.
What did she say on that occasion about that?
That Mrs. Clark had told her she wanted to make her a gift of $15 million and Mrs. Pierre $10 million.
We looked yesterday at a couple letters from you, one written in '93, another written in '95 to Mr. Wallace, where you talked about extraordinary gifts. Would you say that a gift of $15 million was extraordinary to someone's nurse?
I don't know in general, but as I also believe I testified yesterday, that as I got to know Mrs. Clark, I saw how much she cared for the people around her. Mrs. Pierre, Hadassah Peri, Geraldine being and Chris Sattler being the main people at the time.
So again, I go back to, regardless of how she cared about those people, did you think that the figure of $15 million at the time she told you about it, Hadassah told you about it, Mrs. Clark told you about it, that was an extraordinary number?
It was a large number. I don't,
In any event, according to this letter, giving away the total proceeds of the sale of the two paintings, which totaled $25 million, giving those amounts to these two individuals would cause a lot of problems. Am I right?
Yes.
Fiction.
Particularly because you had to deal with gift taxes and capital gains taxes associated with the sale of these two items. Am I right?
Yes.
And then the letter goes on and talks about even further problems that would arise in the effort to raise the money to pay both capital gains and gift taxes associated with the sale of these two paintings and the gifting of $25 million to the two women. Am I right?
Yes.
Almost causing a chain reaction, because then you have to sell more assets in order to cover that, the capital gains and gift taxes. Am I right?
Yes.
And then when you do that, sell those assets, you get more capital gains. Am I right?
Yes.
And that's what this letter was attempting to do, to point out to her how difficult her gift-giving program was in light of the repercussions resulting. Am I right?
Yes.
That's why you wrote this letter.
Yes.
Now, after writing this letter, did you sit down and talk to her about this subject and what the contents of this letter?
Yes.
Is anybody else present with you when you did that?
No.